I'm Janice Edwards. Coming up on Signature Silicon Valley, we're starting off with a focus on treatments for mental illness, innovations that can make a difference. And then Narika makes a life-altering difference for those dealing with domestic violence. For the Love of Amy is a beautiful memoir. We'll talk with the author. And our show concludes today remembering a Silicon Valley icon, Carl Ray. That's all coming up next. Join us. Welcome to Signature Silicon Valley. I'm Janice Edwards, and thank you so much for joining us. We're starting off today talking about mental illness. Dr. Sonia Parikh and Dr. Vidushi Savant have created Savant Care, an innovative model for really approaching some of the concerns dealing with mental illness. As we're looking into the holiday season and with stories that have been in the news in the last few months about suicide and domestic violence, it seemed like a really important time to take an opportunity to look at what can be done to help people with coping with a lot of needs. So welcome to you both. Thank you for being here.
We're happy to be here.
I appreciate your being here because the hope is that someone watching who was either in need of services or a family member who has discerned that someone is in need will find information that will help them take those next steps. So before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about Savant Care, because this is a new innovative model that you've created. What makes it different from the typical way of treating mental illness?
So Dr. Savant and I, while we were training at Stanford, we noticed that psychiatric care of today doesn't look much different from the care of 20 years ago. You know, being in the heart of Silicon Valley, we have decided to kind of start a model practice that uses new age technologies and kind of integrates all of the evidence-based technologies that can treat mental illness into one practice.
Okay, so what does that mean specifically in terms of the technologies, Doctor?
So basically, there are different centers all over the U.S., big university centers developing different treatments like virtual reality for addiction or virtual reality for phobias. Then there's a newer treatment, transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is not as new anymore, but it's relatively
so
new.
Transcranial as opposed to the frontal lobe, which is what people think about
as opposed to
the old model in terms of shock therapy. So
yes.
is this is stimulation, or is it basically shock therapy for another part of the brain?
So basically it stimulates a part of the brain that's relevant. As a part of electroconvulsive therapy, you stimulate the whole brain, so it has more side effects. Whereas what you want to do is you want to stimulate a particular part of the brain, which is the one that matters, and that's what transcranial magnetic stimulation does. And then there's more treatments like biofeedback and EMDR, and these treatments are evidence-based, but they're constricted to certain centers in the US. So what we want to do is we want to be able to bring these treatments to people first in all over Bay Area, and then multiply it to all over the US. And we want technology on our side. So we want to use technology to be to make us more efficient, and also to
Provide
be
higher quality
and
care.
more effective in that way.
Yeah.
Because certainly one of the stories that touched so many of us was Robin Williams' suicide. And like we all who met him in some way had a story about him. I'd interviewed him, I worked on the set of Mrs. Doubtfire just so I could see him work, but obviously people who were close to him knew about his pain, and of course you never treated him. We can't really say specifically what's there, but I think what people try to look for in terms of understanding is, so someone's dealing with depression and a medical diagnosis and they're having low moments. What would be the intervention that might prevent them from deciding it's just too much? What would you look at recommending for someone who might be watching or know someone who started to have those kinds of conversations or indicated that despair is a daily occurrence?
Well, I think first of all, understanding the warning signs of impending suicide, and some of which include a family. If you're a family member of someone who's suffering, noticing that they're losing interest in things that they used to care about, they're talking more about dying and looking up ways online to try and die. Saying goodbye to people, giving away prized possessions, these are some of the warning signs. And so once you're kind of aware that something's happening, suicide is very preventable in the sense that there is help out there and there are effective treatments available. So what a family member can do is, or the patient themselves, 911. Going to a nearest emergency room is always available. There's suicide hotlines, one of which 1-800-273-TALK, available to anyone and 24 hours a day, completely confidential. Seeking mental health care. A lot of psych patients who are suffering from depression actually see primary care doctors and don't ever see a mental health professional. And so, there are a lot of us out there and, wanting to help and having effective treatments available to help.
So would that transcranial stimulation or something be something that would help retrain the brain out of depression, or?
Yeah, it can.
Okay.
It can. So basically, we have different strategies, right? One is acute crisis management, and then the other is long-term treatment. So there's a lot of evidence that if you take away lethal means of suicide, if you take away their guns, if you take away their medications that they can overdose on, if you take,
but
if
in
you
this
lock
case,
the
in
knives.
this case, it was a belt, so it's not necessarily that.
Right. I mean,
but
but you can't prevent every single because a lot of people just use different kind of means.
Right.
But if you there's a suicide hotline on bridges, so
Right.
that if you are walking at the bridge thinking about doing it, you could just pick up the phone and call someone.
Hopefully, if that person can think of it differently. I think
Yeah.
one of the things that comes out here, and especially during this season where many people reflect on the holidays and missing others, is that maybe sometimes you take those steps where you don't leave someone alone, even though they say, I just want to be left alone, that
Yeah.
you really take it more seriously than you would have before. Because I think that many times people don't want to think mental illness. They'll look at certain behaviors, whether it's suicidal conversation, and if we're talking about domestic violence, which we want to talk about before this segment concludes as well, is people are not addressing the whys in that way. And hopefully, when we talk about this now and switching to domestic violence, obviously the Ray Rice case in the NFL brought a whole lot of conversation into that realm. But in terms of someone who's making a decision to be physically violent, what kind of treatments can ultimately alter that behavior? I mean, because many times that's where people stay in certain situations. But what are your recommendations from a mental illness perspective?
So there are different causes for aggression, and the treatment would be would depend on the cause of aggression. So you mentioned, football players. Like one of the common causes for aggression in that population who plays contact sports is traumatic brain injury. So basically, the brain sort of jiggles in your skull, and it hits your skull at multiple places, and you get injuries. So there are certain parts of the brain that are sensitive to these injuries, and are also the parts of brain that control your behavior and emotions. So if you have a lot of brain injuries, you can have a disinhibition of control over yourself. And aggression can also independently come as a part of brain injury. So, but it's not that they can't control their behavior entirely. They can control when an episode of rage is coming on. A person with a traumatic brain injury is what I'm talking about. But they can control how they take their anger out. Like You can teach in cognitive behavior therapy about how to control your anger.
And the biofeedback would help someone become aware of that. And we should say, I mentioned Ray Rice, well, we know nothing specifically about that situation. We're just mentioning it because it was one in the news. So that's one where biofeedback and a combination, sometimes even EMDR to deal with past trauma is something that might be effective.
And of course,
And
medications.
Medication. And that's the reluctance too. Many people are concerned that the medication will take away their personality. But how do you persuade people that medication can often be the saving grace as opposed to the failing one?
That is, our duty every day in practice, because obviously a lot of our medications are stigmatized. But a lot of our medications are very symptom-oriented. We target symptoms, and in this particular case, aggression is the symptom. And there are a lot of proven medications that have studies behind them that are very helpful in these cases.
So in this case, if someone is seeing a primary care doctor, they would get a referral, and then they would come and hopefully with the technology as well as some of the tradition, we'd see improved results.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And continued success.
All right.
Work. If you'd like to know more about Savant Care, the details are on our screen. Vandana Kumar is the publisher of India Currents, and she is also the board chair of Narika, which is an organization that helps South Asian women who are dealing with domestic violence. Welcome, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
In our previous segment, we mentioned domestic violence from the mental illness perspective, but now we're talking about when someone is trying to get out of a situation, some of the dangers that especially women face and are concerned about when they're also concerned about their immigration status. So can you explain what services Narika provides?
See, we provide a variety of services. One is we have a helpline where women can call in, and we provide culturally specific, linguistically specific help to immigrant women, especially the ones who are coming from South Asia. Why do these women not go to the regular shelters? Because the challenges of an immigrant woman are a little bit different, because the regular shelters just don't understand.
Don't understand what?
That why are you putting up with your in-laws' abuse? Why are you putting up with, what is dowry?
Oh, I see.
But these are very specific issues that the South Asian community deals with.
And so all of those might impact a woman's decision to try to leave or get help or speak up about experiencing abuse.
Absolutely, because there is an aspect that women feel a sense of shame that when they are experiencing abuse, they don't want to show to the outside community that I'm in an abusive situation, because it's a sense of failure in a sense.
And that's universal, but culturally the pressure to stay married within the South Asian community especially is very heavy.
It's very heavy. So we have the helpline where we offer help to women. We also have a rather unique program that we call SEED, which is a Survivor Economic Empowerment and Development. And it's a 12-week course where we teach basic life skills. It's sort of surprising, right? Why basic life skills?
No, I think I understand that very well, because people grow up and you have certain workarounds, and then you discover that. But what in a 12-week course do you learn?
We divide it into 4 segments. One is ESL, English as a Second Language, financial literacy, because a lot of immigrants, and that's not limited to women from South Asia, but immigrants from all over the world that come to the United States, they don't know how to navigate the financial system. How do you open a bank account? How do you create a budget? How do you do basic stuff that you need to do to live by yourself, to be
and especially if someone else has been handling all of those decisions,
exactly,
and someone's making the choice to leave and maybe take children, and all of a sudden responsibilities are going to shift entirely.
Absolutely, and they need to be prepared. And we also teach computer literacy, because a lot of women are also not aware of how to even navigate the web, how to find resources. And we also teach them some job readiness, career skills. We help them create a resume, we help them do some job interview training. So at the end of it, when they leave the 12-week program, they are sort of ready to be able to handle things on their own. More importantly, they also know that their resources are available.
Now, is this a program that they would do once they've left the situation, or might they avail themselves of the program even surreptitiously while still dealing with
It's
a domestic
both.
violence situation?
It's both. And we like to think of it as sort of a prevention component of our work. Because if women are empowered to stand on their feet, to know their rights, to be able to navigate this new country by themselves, then perhaps they won't stand for abuse.
And there has to be care taken in that too, because sometimes the most dangerous time is once a woman decides she's not going to stand for abuse. And you
Yes.
help with programs.
We do. We help them get legal help. We help provide translations because a lot of times women are linguistically challenged because they don't understand how to navigate in English. So we help with that. We accompany them to the courts. We help get restraining orders, depending on what it is that the woman needs, because every woman's needs are different.
Yes.
And we know that it takes a lot of courage for any woman to actually contact an agency. And the first thing that they realize is help is available.
Yes.
And I think that itself is a huge help. But nevertheless, it's very, very hard, Janice, to leave a situation which is maybe familiar, but even if it is abusive.
And many times there's love there too, which complicates it, and there's the hope that the person who's being abusive will change. And many times what someone has told us, if you didn't do this, I wouldn't hurt you.
Yeah.
And so once someone's been in a situation for a while, the emotional way of reacting to life is different, and that retraining has to occur there as well.
And there's a lot of gender inequality. It's this difference in the way we treat men and women, even today. So women end up being undermined. And in many cases, they end up feeling that it's their fault. Maybe if they had handled things differently, maybe if they had done things differently, abuse wouldn't have happened. And let's not just talk about like physical abuse. Physical abuse is like the final stage of abuse.
But there's also mental and emotional, psychological abuse.
There's emotional, there's legal, financial, where their financial help or aid or any kind of assistance is withheld from a woman, or if her passport is taken away, or if she
things that
has
undermine her independence in so many ways.
Yeah.
There are so many areas in which you make a difference, a life-saving difference. I've talked to survivors of your program who've been helped, and so that's why I wanted to make sure that we offered both the hotline information as well as the general information, which is on our screen, because we just want to encourage anyone who's in need to reach out, no matter what your economic status. Many times people are afraid because there's wealth and they can't imagine leaving that. But you provide information, services, and support in all arenas. And so we just thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. And I also wanted to just let you know that, domestic violence is universal and democratic. It knows no economic barrier or racial barrier or it
Or
knows
any
no
other-
barriers.
Exactly,
really,
exactly.
Of any
and,
other barrier.
and if anybody needs help, even if they're not of South Asian origin,
Yeah.
if they were to call the number, you have referrals available. So
Absolutely.
we encourage you to seek help. Your life is worth it. And again, those details are on our screen. Julie Riera Matsushima is known for having put her signature on our valley in a number of ways through her accomplishments. But today we're focusing specifically on her book, For the Love of Amy, because as a grandmother like most, she anticipated the birth of her twin granddaughters and found that one granddaughter had suffered from brain damage. Her name was Amy. Her name is Amy, and these days she's a 17-year-old. But at the time she was born, there was not much hope that she'd survive beyond the first year. Julie, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. You have an incredible story here. So I gave a little synopsis, but let's talk more about Amy and the journey that your family has taken with her.
Well, when they were born, we were very excited. I was anticipating being a grandmother, but not overjoyed. I had my own life and thought I would carry on as usual. And when the twins were born, Amy suffered massive brain damage, and it was very distressful to the family. The prognosis was very grim, and the doctors said that she would probably not live more than a few days and certainly not beyond 1 year.
Oh my goodness.
So it was pretty devastating.
Yes, and Chloe, her twin, was born perfectly normal.
Normal.
Yes.
Yeah.
So at that time, you couldn't have imagined what the journey would involve, and even people within the family having different ideas about what should be done. And I think one of the things that's important about your story is that it speaks to people who are dealing with that same shock and grappling with how do you care for a child who needs so much care.
It's very complicated and very complex. For a family, it's a huge, I don't want to say burden, but in reality it is a huge burden. The responsibility to take care of a child with special needs is unending, and it's very draining on the parents, and oftentimes grandparents are not supportive because they don't know what to do and they're not comfortable stepping up. And I think in my particular case, when I first saw Amy, and I was the first family member to actually spend time with her, we really bonded, and I just felt a need to find out all I could about her situation, her brain damage, and what I could do to help. I had no idea at that time making that commitment to myself would be a commitment that is still ongoing.
Yes, it's
I had
life-changing.
no idea, and it's certainly taken me on a different journey and path in life.
Yes, and you serve on councils regarding disabilities. You're working to create a park with Rotary. Let's talk a little
Yes.
bit about that.
Well, our Rotary Club of San Jose has been really instrumental in embracing children with special needs. I was very adamant during my year as president of that club to raise awareness about the needs of these families. And our club had to select a centennial project, celebrating 2014 as our centennial year. And it was someone in the club, offered the park as an idea, and it was accepted. And the club decided to raise the funds to build this equal play, all-inclusive park here in San Jose and gift it to the city of San Jose.
And it will be incredible. You share a story of Amy and Chloe going to the park and Chloe being able to play, whereas Amy's in her wheelchair and can't participate. So now this will be a park where other children in wheelchairs will be able to play.
Yes, and not just children in wheelchairs. The design of the park is all-inclusive, so we have looked at every disability: sight impairment, hearing impairment, autism, sensory, and mobility. So if a family goes to the park and a child has any disability, that family will be able to identify what the child can do within the park and the playground. So it won't scream disability or handicap. It'll be a park for all children to play together, and that's really the mission of the park,
Yes.
is to have it be all-inclusive.
That is wonderful. And now that Amy is 17, tell us a little bit about her personality and what's important to her at this time.
Probably boys.
She went to the prom, right?
She's going to
the prom.
And she was asked to go to the prom by her lifelong little friend from school. She has quite a personality. She can talk, and she is wheelchair bound. But she loves music, and she loves to have her hair done and nails done and participate in things all girls like to do.
Yes.
And she's quite a rascal. She has a sense of humor, and she loves gossip. So
Gossip
quite
is
funny.
so entertaining.
Yes, it is.
What advice would you give for families in terms of when one child has special needs and the other does not, so that both receive the attention that is necessary for developing in a healthy way.
Yes, that is probably the most difficult of all the issues, besides the care for the child with a disability. The rest of the family still has needs, and oftentimes these children are perceived as the ones getting all the attention. Siblings sometimes mistake care for attention, so it's complicated. But in our family, I've tried to take Amy when the other children have soccer tournaments and things that their parents would take them to, that Amy may not be, it may be too difficult for her to tolerate the day or whatever the situation is. So I try to step up. I think the most important thing is to encourage family members outside the immediate family, extended family, to step up and participate in helping in all different ways.
Yes, it's wonderful. The name of your foundation is after one of Amy's favorite songs of Dean Martin, called That's Amore. So
Yes.
it's That's Amore Foundation. We have details on our screen. Thank you for joining us, and congratulations on your
Thank
Women of
you.
Impact Award recently, too.
Oh, thank you. I was really honored to receive that.
We are blessed to meet so many people who leave an indelible impression not only on the Valley, but in our hearts. Carl Ray, who was a frequent guest at Signature Silicon Valley, was one of those people. He shared with us his discoveries after his father was killed before his eyes in his one-man play, A Killing in Choctaw. And then he visited us again when he penned the book, Cured, The Power of Forgiveness. Carl was an incredible man. I felt very privileged to know him and was very saddened, as many of us have been, by his passing. Today we remember some of his words on his last visit with us, and we dedicate the show to his memory.
I was very depressed for years.
And I think for a lot of people, especially for a lot of men, the idea of going to therapy and opening up is really something that they think, I'll cope, I'll do something else. But how did it ultimately help you?
Oh, it helped me tremendously. I found out that years when I was back at Tuskegee in college, and I would have these spells where I'd get on the floor and I couldn't get up out of the dormitory. And that happened, and years later, as a young man working in industry, all of a sudden something would happen and I would just have to stay in my apartment for days, and that was depression. And I found out a whole lot of things about depression that I didn't really know, which I wish I had known 30 years before.
Right, and yet during that time you became a comedian, you started performing this, and now you've performed all over the world. One of the also seminal incidents was when someone suggested that you forgive the man who killed your father.
Yeah. I am you're out of your mind. You don't forgive people for doing something like that. But through him making me so angry, and he finally said, I will leave you alone. I will never bother you again if you will let me hear you say the words. I had no intention of forgiving the guy, but when I said the words, it was just like a different planet, the most spiritual, freeing moment I've ever had in my life, and that turned my life around.
So how was your life different after that moment?
I didn't have the anger, I didn't have this thing I was dragging, I didn't have the hatred that I'd carried for this man all those years. It was like, he wasn't important, he could walk in there, sit down, I could have a cup of coffee with him, and it was just free.
I think one of the most incredible things that I'll remember about Carl is that he loved to laugh, and he loved to enjoy each moment and savored connecting with people. So I encourage you as we leave today to connect with those you love, enjoy every moment, and continue to put your signature on our valley and on our world. I'm Janice Edwards. Thank you for joining us.